This is the Ryen Russillo Podcast, presented by FanDuel. Week 9. Good luck with this one. I'm going to focus a little on the AFC here. We all know this was an absolutely crazy week with the results and some of the stuff that happened. And I wonder if we're going to be better off just kind of looking at this week of this self-contained thing, or if we actually learned anything. Let's start with Cincinnati. Remember, they were the number 1 seed in the AFC 2 weeks ago. Today, they're 10th and out of the playoffs. They're last in the AFC North. That was 2 weeks ago. We're like, man, this team is talented. Burrow, I take him over a lot of other guys. I don't think we ever put him in the group of maybe some of the top tier young guys that we're always mentioning all the time, whether that was Herbert, and maybe it's closer there than we think. I don't think he was in the Lamar group, not Kyler Murray for me either, but we really liked him, and now he's actually tied with Sam Darnold, who's a mess, by the way, with 11 interceptions. So Cleveland comes out and smokes him. I also think if we were going to do this story, if the game had gone another way, Cincinnati's driving the football down, and I'm kind of thinking like, all right, how would I talk about this game? And then it would maybe turn into a Burrow versus Baker thing. And I think most of the public would say, hey, I'd rather have Joe Burrow. But for a day, Cleveland reminded us what their talent level is. And it really is a very talented roster. And Myles Garrett single-handedly, like as a defensive player, wrecks more games probably than anybody other than Aaron Donald. So the Jets' loss for Cincinnati, I guess it could have been an alarming thing, but we just see some losses. I mean, hell, Tennessee's the 1 seed. We'll get to them a little bit later. They've got the number 1 record in the NFL at 7-2. The number 1 record in the AFC at 7-2, because Arizona's still 8-1 with their amazing win against San Francisco without all their players. But Cleveland just smashes them, and they're the number 2 running team in the league. And the other part of this is without Odell, the numbers are pretty clear. They're a better football team without Odell Beckham Jr. Now, Odell's gone. I'll admit that I think when you do a sit down on ESPN with Lil Wayne and you talk about how much Eli Manning essentially sucks and he's your quarterback, there's a better way to handle that. And it's kind of the same thing all over again, although I'm not sure it was nearly as bad. It was also surprising how many people supported Odell for being like, well, look, Eli can't get the ball down the field. You're like, yeah, I know, but I still think there's a better way of doing this. Okay, here's the thing is, and I went through Sheil Kapadi's work on The Athletic. He had a piece up on Odell Beckham and who he's been as a receiver here. It was late last week on The Athletic again. So 29 games for Odell with Cleveland, 114 catches, 1,586 yards. If you look at Odell with Cleveland, among the 99 receivers that ran 500 routes since the start of 2019, Odell was 43rd in yards per game. He was 33rd in yards per reception. In his time with Cleveland, the drops went from 6% to 8%. And that number there on the drop part of it put him, of the 88 wide receivers who had at least 100 targets, he was towards the bottom. So the drop percentage went higher. Look, here's the thing. And again, his drop rate was 63rd out of 88 qualified receivers. With Odell in the lineup, over the average, depending on what metrics you want to look at, the Cleveland averaged out as the 20th best offense in the NFL. Without Odell, it was 8th best. Now, is it all on Odell? No, that would be unfair. I think there were times where I'd watch games where I felt like it was Odell's fault, and I thought there were other times where Baker just flat out missed him. I think with certain receivers, if you're supposed to be a true one, a tier one, you make a lot of those nasty contested catches. And his contest rate actually went up a little bit. But there were other times where like, hey, look, I would watch a play and be like, well, DeAndre Hopkins, that would never happen. Would never happen with him. Some of the other guys that I think are like clearly the number 1 guy, or at least in that first group. And Beckham hasn't been that in a while. And I don't know if he's ever going to be that. He's still only 29. But clearly another team's going to want to take a shot at it. But it always feels like Beckham's the guy, depending on which side of the argument you're on. It's like, oh, okay, well, here's another quarterback. So like, okay, we're doing it again. Here's another quarterback that couldn't get you the football when actually when you're not there, they're a top 10 offense in the NFL. And it comes down to something that's very similar amongst all of us, is that we just don't really like admitting it may have been us. If something doesn't work out at work, how often do we say, you know what, it was me. I just didn't bring it. I wasn't good at it. Just flat out not good at that job, deserve to lose it. No, we're just going to make a million excuses and talk about where all the things around us prevented us from being better. So we'll see what happens there. But the stats really can't be denied at this point. And over a long stretch of having Beckham, and yes, 2 injuries, they were a better offense without him. So we'll see what happens. So the Browns smoke Cincinnati. Let's take a look at the rest of the AFC. The Bills, since they lost week 1 to Pittsburgh, had scored 35, 43, 40, 38, 31, and 26. Then they score 6 points against Jacksonville. This was the number one defense in Buffalo by a wide margin. So they hold Jacksonville to 9. Could have been worse. I don't know. Did you guys see the field goal kicker miss 3 straight field goals because of penalties? I can't even imagine how bad he didn't want to go out for the third one. 4 total turnovers on the season in the previous 7 games, 3 against Jacksonville. Actually, Buffalo has been running the football better this season than maybe you would think, but they couldn't do it yesterday. And I'd imagine this is another perfect example where maybe Cleveland showed us something and we're learning more about Cincinnati. If I'm a Bills fan, yeah, the pass happiness, the ratios that people are starting to point out, like, hey, maybe when you throw it 50 times, it becomes a little easier to defend. You need a little bit more balance. But I'd argue that there were some stats that tell you the Bills actually had a little bit more balance in the way they're talked about. But I don't really know what to do with the outcome of that game. I mean, Jacksonville beat Buffalo, and now Buffalo's 5-3, and they still might be the team that we'd all like the most in the playoffs, except for Tennessee, who goes into LA last night. Now let's revisit. Tennessee's 7-2, the 1 seed with 7 playoff teams now. The Rams turn the football over, make it easy for Tennessee, but hell, they won the game. They don't have Derrick Henry. Ryan Tannehill, this is easily the worst season that he's had in the 3 years as the starter with the Titans. Last year, his touchdown interception split was 33-7. This year, it's 11-8, so the stats can't be argued. Their schedule actually graded out as the toughest, and after that Rams win with 7 more to go, it grades out as the easiest, which is another part of this that's pretty crazy. And the Tennessee Titans are 7-0 against last year's playoff teams, with their only losses inexplicably against the Jets and a loss that actually makes a ton of sense now against Arizona in week 1. So is Tennessee really the best team in the AFC? Well, I guess you could pick Baltimore, who had a great comeback, and we're going to get to some of the Lamar numbers here in a second. Buffalo, who I'm even at 5-3, I'm not ready to quit. The Chargers, who get a nice win yesterday after some shakiness, but again, it's still Philadelphia. But you think if you're a really good team, you probably put it on Philadelphia, who's rebuilding right now and probably changing over a lot of their personnel from the guys that we're seeing play this season. So Tennessee has, even though without a great defense, an average offense, missing their most important offensive player, they have the easiest schedule to go. So they still might end up being the 1 seed. We're going to be sitting here entering the playoffs being like, I don't really know what to do with them. Speaking of other things that have changed quickly here, although I don't think you realize this, Kansas City's a half a game out of first place in the AFC West. Now, granted, they're in third because the Chargers and Raiders are both 5-3, but Kansas City's 5-4. Jordan Love had a rough day for Green Bay. You can tell it's bad when Aikman, and then this happens every now and then with quarterbacks. And again, it's Love's first start here, so I don't know what we were really expecting. They couldn't move the football at all. I think they were 0 for 9 in the first 9 third downs they had against the Kansas City defense that's allowing 6.4 yards per play, last in the NFL, and Green Bay scores 7 points. They did actually outgain Kansas City in this one, but the Chiefs are, with the rest of the schedule here, a bunch of division games still to go. So a chance to make up some ground there. They've got the Raiders again. They've got the Broncos twice. They got the Raiders twice, and they have the Chargers one more time. They lost to them by a touchdown, as you remember, in week 3. But the Chiefs are actually a half game out, although in third place in the AFC West. So they're actually still alive, despite the fact it still looks like a mess. You're at home against the Packers, and the best you can do is score 13 points. A Green Bay defense that isn't all that great. You scored 13 points against them. So maybe it gets back to kind of some of the stuff that we learned about in the Ravens comeback against Minnesota, is that, all right, if everybody's playing you the same way, you have to adjust to it. And I think Lamar Jackson at times with a zone defense, because everybody was afraid to turn and run with receivers man-to-man against Lamar and then have Lamar just run all over the place, that there was intermediate throws that Lamar struggled with. This is not an opinion. It is fact. The thing is he's figured out how to hit on some of these intermediate throws. So Lamar, who was 0-6 in his first 3 seasons with down 10 or more, has 3 comebacks this season. He did it against Minnesota this weekend. He did it against the Colts and Kansas City earlier on. That's 3 10 points or more comebacks this season, most of the NFL. Now, we always worried about Lamar having to come back in a game because of these numbers and having to air it out. He's airing it out on the intermediate throws, and he lit it up in the second half yesterday, 19 of 24, 201 yards in the second half. And honestly, I think the MVP conversation is down to Lamar and Kyler. I don't know if Lamar is going to win it again. I don't know if people are going to want the story thing where it's harder to kind of win it that second time, and Kyler sitting out and realizing that Colt McCoy actually is the most amazing backup you can have because it's almost unfair. That's sort of a joke. But Arizona not having Hopkins, A.J. Green, Chase Edmonds goes out with a high ankle sprain in the first quarter in that blowout against San Francisco. That's that might be the best win considering your personnel part of it, but San Francisco's 0-4 at home, so maybe that's just not that good of a team other than Fred Warner. But Arizona and Murray, and I think Baltimore and Lamar are really what you're looking at here with some of the MVP conversation. Denver, Dallas, again, no idea except that Teddy Bridgewater, just when you're about to doubt him, Teddy Bridgewater is the quarterback version of Iowa. Just when you think Iowa is like you're over the Kirk Ferentz thing, like, hey, this isn't going to work, then they'll have some magical little run for a while where you're like, man, look at Iowa again. And then it all falls apart, and then they're not relevant for a couple seasons. Just when you think you're ready to make a change, first of all, Iowa's not going to ever get rid of those guys, but you understand the point. Bridgewater has not been very good this season, and then they absolutely stomped Dallas, who's been statistically one of the best teams in the NFL this year. I think the best lesson for the entire Week 9 NFL experience is to go weeks from now, like, remember how weird Week 9 was? Because other than Cleveland putting it on Cincinnati, which I don't know a lot of us saw coming, I think we saw a lot of results that may not mean actually anything a couple weeks from now.